The gun was pressed against Harvey McCrae's temple when Sarah Carver walked through the door of the Dusty Creek relay station, and the look on her face was not fear. It was fury. "Put it down," she said, her voice low and absolutely steady, like the calm surface of a river hiding a deadly current beneath. "Put it down or I will drop you where you stand, and I promise you my aim is better than yours." The man holding the gun, a thick-necked brute named Cord Tillies, who rode for the Haverson gang and smelled like he had not seen water in a month, laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound, full of confidence that did not belong to a man in his position, because he had not yet looked at what Sarah held in her hands. She held a Sharps Model 1874 rifle, and she held it like she had been born with it pressed against her cheek. "Lady, you best walk back out that door," Cord said, digging the barrel harder into Harvey's skull. Harvey did not flinch, which meant either he was braver than any man Sarah had ever met or he was already beyond caring. She suspected the former, because she had been watching Harvey McCrae long enough to know that fear was not a language he spoke fluently. "I will not be walking anywhere," Sarah said. "And you have about 4 seconds to make the smartest decision of your miserable life." She could see Harvey's eyes. They were gray, the color of a storm-threatened sky, and right now they were calculating. He was looking at her, and she could see him doing what men always did when they first looked at her, underestimating her. She watched the moment that shifted, watched it cross his face like a shadow crossing open ground. He saw her hands. He saw how still they were. He saw the absolute absence of trembling. Cord Tillies made his choice. He swung the gun toward Sarah. Harvey McCrae moved in the same half-second, dropping low and driving his elbow into Cord's midsection with the force of a man who had been waiting for exactly that opening. The gun discharged into the ceiling, raining plaster dust and splinters down on both of them, and Sarah stepped left just one clean step and brought the butt of the Sharps down across Cord's wrist with a crack that was not the gun. Cord Tillies dropped screaming to the floorboards. Harvey stood up straight, breathing hard, looking at Sarah across the wreckage of the last 30 seconds. There was blood on his collar from where the gun had cut his temple. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing something complicated. "You just walked in from outside," he said finally. "Yes," she agreed. "In the middle of January. That is correct. There is 2 feet of snow on the ground and the temperature has not been above 10 degrees since last Thursday." "I am aware," Sarah said. "I was in it." Harvey looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the rifle in her hands and then at the door she had come through and then back at her. Outside the relay station windows, the Rocky Mountains of Colorado Territory rose up white and indifferent and enormous against a sky the color of hammered pewter. "Where," he said slowly, "did you come from?" she told him, and he did not speak for a very long time after. This is not where the story truly begins, of course. A story like this one, the kind that changes both people permanently, the kind that leaves marks that are not wounds but something deeper and more permanent than wounds, does not begin with a gunshot. It begins with a decision. And Sarah Carver had been making decisions that terrified other people for the better part of her 26 years. She was born in Philadelphia in 1851. The second daughter of Edmund Carver, who was a physician, and Margaret Carver, who had grown up on a homestead in Pennsylvania and had passed to her daughters the particular knowledge that women in this country were generally given 2 choices, helplessness or invisibility, and that neither was acceptable. Edmund Carver had added to this inheritance a clinical precision, a love of observable fact, and a rifle he had carried through the war between the states, which he taught both his daughters to shoot with the same seriousness with which he taught them anatomy and Latin. Sarah had taken to the rifle the way water takes to a channel. She had a gift for it, not merely for the mechanics, though she understood those better than men who had been shooting their whole lives, but for the mathematics of it, the parabola of a bullet's flight, the calculus of wind and elevation and distance. She had read every treatise on ballistics she could find, corresponded with gunsmiths, and by the time she was 18 had developed a method of range calculation that adjusted for altitude and temperature in a way that none of the popular guides of the era had yet codified. She was, in the plainest possible terms, a better shot than nearly anyone she had ever encountered. What had brought her west was not romanticism. She was not the kind of woman who came west for romance. She came west because her father had died in 1874, leaving her and her sister with the house in Philadelphia and very little else, and because her sister had promptly married a reasonably kind man and settled into a life that Sarah knew she would have rather died than accept. Not because there was anything wrong with it, because it simply was not hers. A physician's widow in Denver, a woman named Clara Holt, who had been a patient of her father's, and had always had more brass than anyone gave her credit for, had written to Sarah in the autumn of 1876 with a proposition. Clara had established a school in Denver City, and she needed someone who could teach, not needlework and watercolors, though those could be offered if parents insisted. Someone who could teach real mathematics, surveying, basic medicine. Someone who could teach practical science to children whose parents were building a civilization in a place where practical knowledge was the difference between life and death. Sarah had written back that she would come. She had set out from Philadelphia in October of 1876, taken the Union Pacific to Cheyenne, and then begun the process of actually reaching Denver, which was not as simple as it sounds. She had a guide from Cheyenne who abandoned her at the first serious snowfall. She had a second guide who lasted longer, but developed a chest cold so severe that she had left him at a homestead outside of Fort Collins with strict instructions to drink nothing but boiled water and rest for 2 weeks. From there, she had continued alone. She had crossed the first range, the Front Range foothills, alone, in late November, navigating by a compass and a set of topographical survey maps she had acquired in Cheyenne, and had spent several nights memorizing. She had nearly been caught in a blizzard at 8,000 feet, and had survived it by finding a pine-sheltered hollow, building a fire that she fed carefully through the night, and remaining absolutely calm about the fact that she might die. She did not die. She had come down into the valley between ranges and resupplied at a small settlement called Rockford 3 buildings, a trading post, and a population of 11, most of whom stared at her as though she had descended from another planet. She had asked about conditions across the second range, had been told that nobody crossed in January, had noted this information and then crossed anyway, because Denver was on the other side and she had a job waiting. The second crossing had taken her 12 days and had included an encounter with a mountain lion that she had resolved with the sharps and the very precise application of her elevation-adjusted range calculation at a distance of 300 yards in poor light. She was not proud of killing things, but she was proud of the shooting, because it had been extraordinary by any honest assessment. It was on the far side of that second range, coming down through what would eventually become the territory of Glenwood Canyon, that she had seen the lights of the Dusty Creek relay station and had walked toward them through the dark and the cold, and had opened the door to find Harvey McCrae at gunpoint. So, that is where we are. Harvey McCrae was 30 years old and had been running the Dusty Creek relay station for the past 3 years, since the stage line that employed him had assigned him to this particular stretch of the Colorado Road. It was not a glamorous position. It required him to maintain the horses, maintain the building, keep a record of every coach that passed through, and exercise enough authority over the rough country surrounding him to prevent the station from being robbed or burned down. He had managed all of these things, though the last had required violence on 2 occasions and a great deal of careful diplomacy on many others. He was a big man. Not enormous in the cartoonish way of men who made their living by intimidation, but the particular kind of big that came from actual physical work, broad through the chest and shoulders, hands that showed the calluses of reins and axe handles and rope, face that had been weathered by 5 seasons of high-altitude Colorado sun and wind until it had the look of good leather. He had a jaw that suggested stubbornness and a mouth that suggested, to those who looked carefully, humor. He had the gray eyes that Sarah had already noted, and beneath them a kind of quiet intelligence that most people missed because they were too busy looking at the size of him. He had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer, had gone west at 21 with nothing but a good horse, and the specific stubbornness that seems to be issued to young men from Missouri along with their birth certificates. He had worked cattle drives, worked as a scout, worked briefly as a deputy in a town that had not lasted long enough to develop a crime rate worth mentioning, and had eventually found himself in the employ of the Rocky Mountain Stage and Freight Company, which paid him a salary that was not generous but was reliable, and which did not require him to shoot anyone as a matter of policy, though it did not strictly prevent it. He was not a man who made assumptions about people. That was important, and it set him apart from most men of his time and place. He had seen enough of the world to know that assumptions were just another way of being wrong, but he was honest enough with himself to admit that when the door of the relay station had opened and a woman had walked in, his first instinct had been the wrong one. His first instinct had been something along the lines of, "Here is someone in need of assistance." The Sharps had corrected that impression immediately. What he could not have predicted, and what would become the central fact of his understanding of Sarah Carver, the thing that everything else was organized around, was what she told him when he asked where she had come from. He had made coffee. He had tied cord Tilly's to the support beam in the corner of the station, which Cord was not happy about but was not in a position to resist given his broken wrist, and the presence of Harvey's own Colt revolver on the table within Harvey's easy reach. He had looked at Sarah across the steam from 2 tin cups and listened to her describe, in calm and factual terms, the route she had taken from Cheyenne. He did not interrupt her. He had been raised by a woman who had very strong opinions about men who interrupted women, and he had the particular kind of respect for his mother that prevents certain behaviors from ever becoming habits. When she finished, he sat for a moment. "You came over Rabbit Ears Pass," he said. "Yes." "In January." "Also yes." "Alone." "I had a compass and good maps." "Miss Carver," Harvey said carefully, "I grew up trapping in Missouri and I have spent 3 years in these mountains. I would not cross Rabbit Ears Pass alone in January." Something shifted slightly in her expression. It was not quite a smile. She was not yet at a point where she was giving him smiles, but it was adjacent to one. "Then perhaps you should adjust your assessment of what you would and would not do," she said. He looked at her for a long time. He was doing the thing, he realized, the calculating, the reassessing. She was watching him do it with the particular patience of a woman who had watched many men do it and was used to waiting for them to arrive at the correct conclusion. "What was the most dangerous part?" he asked, and the question surprised her. She had expected something dismissive, or something patronizing, or simply a change of subject. A man who asked for more information was a different kind of man. "The mountain lion at 2,000 yards was genuinely unpleasant," she said. "But the most dangerous part was probably the 3rd night on the upper pass. The temperature dropped faster than my calculations had suggested it would, and I was about 400 feet below where I would have needed to be to find shelter before dark. I had to make the decision to keep moving rather than camp, which is generally the wrong decision, and then I had to execute it correctly." "How did you know you were making the right call?" She looked at him with something that he would later identify as genuine surprise, the surprise of a woman who had never been asked the right questions. "I did not know," she said. "I calculated the probability of surviving the night without shelter against the probability of surviving continued movement in poor visibility, factored in my physical condition and fuel reserves, and concluded that movement had a better expected outcome. I was correct, as it turned out, but I did not know." Harvey McCrae made a decision in that moment. It was not a romantic decision. He was not the kind of man who made romantic decisions after 45 minutes of acquaintance. It was a professional decision, and it was this. He was going to get this woman to Denver. He was going to do it because she had crossed 2 mountain ranges alone to get to a job, and that was the kind of thing that deserved to reach its destination. "There is a coach through here day after tomorrow," he said. "Heading into Denver, I can get you on it. I would be grateful for that. You will need to rest before then. I am aware." A pause. "My feet are quite cold." This, Harvey later thought, was the most extraordinary example of understatement he had ever encountered, because when he helped her off with her boots, at her direction, in a businesslike manner, it became clear that her feet were not merely cold but were showing early signs of frostbite on several toes. He had dealt with frostbite before, knew the treatment, and spent the next 2 hours doing what needed to be done, which involved warm water and carefully monitored temperature and a great deal of patience, and which left him kneeling on the floor of the relay station at 11 o'clock at night with Sarah Carver's feet in his hands and a very strange feeling in his chest that he filed away for later examination. She did not complain once. She read the survey maps she had been carrying, making notations in a small leather-bound journal while he worked. She asked him, without looking up, what the grade was like on the road south toward Denver and whether the company was planning to extend the line through the canyon. She was, he realized, already thinking about the next problem. The immediate crisis: cold feet, questionable toes, the relay station with a bound criminal in the corner was already background. "You are a very unusual person," he said. "So I have been told." She made another notation. "Is the frostbite serious?" "You will keep all your toes." "Good, I am fond of them," he laughed. He did not mean to. It came out without his permission, a short, genuine sound, and she looked up from her journal with an expression that said she had filed this away too. Cord Tillies, from his beam in the corner, said something unpleasant. Harvey looked at him with an expression that ended the conversation, and Cord subsided. "What does he want?" Sarah asked, not looking up from her maps. "He is part of the Haverson gang. They have been trying to get information about the gold shipment coming through next week. He wanted me to tell him the schedule." "Did you?" "I did not." "Of course you did not." She turned a page of the journal. "You should send a rider to the nearest lawman tonight." "I was planning to." "Who is the nearest lawman?" "Sheriff out of Glenwood, about 12 miles south." "Can your rider be trusted?" Harvey considered this. "Why do you ask?" She finally looked up. Her eyes were a clear, unusual brown, the color of good topsoil after rain, which was not a comparison he would have made out loud at that stage, but which occurred to him nonetheless. "Because the Haverson gang has 17 members, according to the territorial bulletins issued in October. And if Cord was sent here alone to gather intelligence rather than to rob the station directly, it suggests a degree of organizational sophistication that also suggests the possibility of informants." "I would choose your rider carefully." Harvey stared at her. "You read the territorial bulletins." "I read everything available before traveling through unfamiliar territory. The October bulletin included a detailed map of reported Haverson gang activity, which is partly why I stayed as high on the pass as I did rather than using the lower southern route. There were 3 reported incidents on the lower road in November." The feeling in Harvey's chest was doing something more complicated now. He recognized it, distantly, as the feeling of meeting someone whose mind worked in a way that he genuinely admired. It was not a feeling he had encountered often, and he treated it with appropriate caution. "I will choose my rider carefully," he said. He chose Tom Birch, a wiry 20-year-old who had been working at the station for 6 months and who Harvey trusted because the kid was too straightforward to successfully lie about anything. Tom rode out at midnight. Harvey sat by the door with the colt, and Sarah slept in the back room, a small, cold room with a narrow cot and a wool blanket, and she was asleep, apparently, within minutes of lying down, which was the sleep of someone who had been surviving on calculated power restoration for 12 days, and was now finally in a position to let the calculation rest. Harvey sat with the dark and the cold and the fire he kept fed through the night, and he thought about Rabbit Ears Pass in January, and he thought about her hands on the sharps, and he thought about the way she had said, "I calculated the probability," as though this were the most normal thing in the world, as though everyone did not simply freeze and guess and hope. When Tom came back at dawn with the deputy sheriff and 2 armed men, Cord Tillies was taken into custody without significant drama. The deputy, a careful middle-aged man named Franklin who had the look of someone who had survived by never being careless, took Harvey's statement and then looked at Sarah, who had come out of the back room at the sound of horses and was standing with her coffee cup and her journal. "This the woman who was here?" Franklin said. "Yes," Harvey said. Franklin looked at the ceiling, which still had the bullet hole in it from the previous evening, and then at the splintered plaster on the floor, and then at Sarah. "You all right, ma'am?" "Perfectly well," Sarah said. "The frostbite is manageable. What can you tell me about the Haverson gang's current operational territory?" "I want to know if the road to Denver is clear." Franklin blinked. He was not accustomed to women asking him operational questions about gang territory at 6 in the morning. He answered her anyway, because she was looking at him with an expression that suggested that not answering would be considerably worse than answering, and because 20 years of law enforcement had given him excellent instincts about people who were not to be trifled with. The road to Denver was, apparently, clear. The Haverson gang had been quiet south of Glenwood since November, which Franklin attributed to the arrest of 2 of their members in October, and which Sarah attributed, reviewing her maps after Franklin left, to the topography creating a natural patrol boundary at the canyon mouth. They would not cross north of that boundary unless they had significant intelligence about a specific target. "Which suggests," she said to Harvey, who was making breakfast salt pork and cornbread from a cast iron pan, which was not elegant but which smelled magnificent, "that the gold shipment timing may already be compromised. Who else knows the schedule?" "Company management in Denver." "The mine office in Leadville, me." Harvey turned the cornbread in the pan. "And whoever is sending it. That is too many people. It always is." She watched him cook. He moved with an economy that she associated with people who had done practical things for a long time. No wasted motion, no performance, just the direct and efficient execution of the task at hand. She found this appealing in a way that she did not immediately examine. "How long have you been at this station?" she asked. 3 years. He slid the cornbread onto a tin plate and handed it across the table. "Before that, cattle drives, scout work. Do you intend to stay?" He sat down across from her with his own plate. "I intend to get through this winter," he said. "After that is a question I have not settled." She nodded. She understood this philosophy. She had been operating on the same principle for the past several years, not that the future was irrelevant, but that the immediate future was the one that required accurate prediction. The distant future would be navigated when it became the immediate future. They ate. Outside, the snow was still heavy on the ground, but the sky was beginning to clear, and the peaks to the east caught the early light and held it in a way that was genuinely beautiful, even to someone as focused on practical matters as Sarah Carver. She allowed herself 30 seconds to look at it. "My sister thinks I am going to die out here," she said. It came out without particular planning. Harvey looked up. "Is she right?" "She has not been right yet." He considered this. "Why tell me?" Sarah looked at him steadily. "Because you have not yet asked me why I am doing this, and most people ask that within the first 5 minutes. Either you already understand, or you are too polite to ask, or you do not care, and I am curious which it is." Harvey set down his fork. "I did not ask," he said, "because I did not think you owed me an explanation." There was a silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, one of the relay horses stamped against the cold. "That is the correct answer," Sarah said. It was the beginning of something, though neither of them would have named it yet. They were both, in their different ways, people who named things only when they were certain of the name. Premature naming was imprecise, and imprecision for both of them was a kind of failure they did not allow themselves. The 2 days at the relay station, waiting for the southbound coach, developed their own particular rhythm. Harvey had the station to run, horses to feed and water, records to keep, the minor infrastructure of the operation to maintain, and Sarah helped without being asked, because sitting still had never been something she did well, and because she could see work that needed doing. She was not sentimental about labor. She split wood in the morning, working steadily and without drama, until Harvey came around the corner of the station and stopped with a look of pure involuntary surprise on his face, which she chose to ignore with great diplomacy. In the afternoons, she showed him her range calculation method. This was not, initially, a romantic gesture. She had asked conversationally whether the station was ever used for hunting, and he had said that he sometimes took deer in the fall for the station's meat supply, and she had mentioned her elevation adjustment calculation, and he had said he had never heard of such a thing, and she had said she would show him, and here they were, out behind the station in the January cold with the sharps and a set of targets he had rigged against a snowbank at various distances. He watched her shoot 3 times. He did not say anything for a moment after the third shot. "Your formula adjusts for air density at altitude," he said finally. "Yes. Thinner air means less resistance, which means the bullet travels flatter than you expect at lower elevations. At this altitude, the adjustment is significant. I have been shooting high consistently for 3 years. Most people do at altitude. The instinct trained at sea level is wrong." He looked at the targets. All 3 shots were exactly where she had said they would be. Exactly. Not approximately. Not close. Exactly. "Show me the calculation," he said, so she did. She drew it out in the snow with a stick, the variables, the adjustment factor, the simple arithmetic of it, and he knelt beside her in the cold and studied it with complete focus, the way she had observed that he did everything. Thoroughly, without performance, with genuine desire to understand rather than simply to appear to understand. He asked 4 questions. The questions were good questions. She answered them, and he incorporated the answers and asked a 5th question that was better than the first 4. "You could write this down," he said. "Publish it." She looked at him. "I have written to 3 journals. 2 declined to respond, and 1 informed me that they did not publish work by women." Harvey sat back on his heels and looked at the calculation in the snow, and his expression did something complicated and quiet. "That is a waste," he said. It was not a dramatic statement. He did not make a speech about injustice. He simply said what he thought without ornamentation, and it landed with more weight than a speech would have. "Yes," she said, "it is." They walked back to the station side by side. Their hands did not touch. Neither of them was thinking about hands yet, or at least neither of them was admitting to it. That evening, Harvey wrote down her calculation in his own logbook, working it out from memory and checking each step. She watched him do it from across the table, ostensibly writing in her own journal, and she was aware in the precise, empirical way that she was aware of most things that watching him work was not something she was doing casually. "You have a good memory for mathematics," she said. "I always did. Never had much chance to use it. What would you have done if the chance had been different?" He looked up from the logbook. It was a real question, and he could hear that she meant it. "Engineering, maybe," he said. "Bridges. The way they figure out how much weight a structure can bear. I read about it once and thought it was the most interesting thing I had ever come across." She set down her pen. "Structural mechanics. Is that what it is called?" "Yes. The mathematics of it is beautiful. Would you like me to show you the basic principles?" He would. She did. She drew on 3 sheets of paper from her journal. She carried a great deal of paper, because paper was a tool for her in the way that a hammer was a tool for other people, and explained load distribution and stress, and the calculations that engineers use to design spans and arches. He absorbed all of it with the same focused intensity that he had brought to the shooting calculation, and by the end of the evening they were deep in a conversation about whether the canyon walls to the south could theoretically support a suspension bridge if the stage road was ever extended, and the fire had burned low and neither of them had noticed. When they did notice, they both looked at the fire and then at each other, and there was a moment of awareness that was not yet named, but was not, either, invisible. Harvey rebuilt the fire. Sarah gathered her papers. They said good night in practical terms, and both of them lay awake in their respective spaces, him by the front door where he always slept when alone at the station, her in the back room on the narrow cot, and thought about things that they were not yet ready to think about directly. The second day was colder but clear, the kind of brilliant high-altitude clarity that makes everything look sharp and significant. Sarah spent the morning organizing her journals and the afternoon helping Harvey inventory the station supplies, which he had been meaning to do for 2 weeks and which she turned into a systematic accounting exercise that produced, at the end, a list of what needed to be ordered in the spring, organized by priority and approximate cost. Harvey looked at the list and then at her. "You did this faster than I do it," he said. "You have a good system already. I just accelerated it." He shook his head slowly. "Who taught you accounting?" "My father kept meticulous books. I learned from watching." She rolled up the supply list and set it on the desk. He believed in complete transparency about money. He said the people who pretend not to understand it are usually the people who have the least of it. "Your father sounds like he was a smart man." "He was the smartest person I knew until about 48 hours ago." The statement sat in the air between them. She had not entirely intended to say it, but she did not take it back, because it was factually true and she did not unsay true things. Harvey looked at her with an expression she could not immediately classify. It had elements of something warm in it, and elements of surprise, and underneath both of those something that she was beginning to recognize as the particular quality of a man who was paying attention. He said, "That is a considerable thing to say." "Yes," she agreed. "I said it because it is true." Another silence. These silences between them were not uncomfortable. They were the silences of two people who understood that words should mean something, and that the pause before them was not failure but respect for the meaning to come. "My mother was the smartest person I knew," Harvey said. "She died 4 years ago." "Fever? I am sorry. She would have liked you." He said it simply, as though it were just another factual observation, and looked away toward the window and the light on the snow. She had very little patience for people who dressed things up to avoid saying what they meant. Sarah looked at his profile, the jaw, the particular way his eyes moved when he was thinking, the steadiness of him, and felt something that she had felt very rarely in her life, which was the specific desire to stay somewhere. Not just to pass through, to stay. She did not say this. They were not at the place yet where that could be said. But she noted it, in the precise internal record-keeping that she applied to important data. The coach came through the next morning at 9. It was a Concord coach, the standard vehicle of the Rocky Mountain Stage and Freight Company, pulled by a 6-horse team and driven by a man named Pete Alcott who had been running this route for 2 years, and who greeted Harvey with the comfortable ease of regular acquaintance. There were 3 passengers already inside: a mining company accountant, a woman returning to her family in Denver, and a young man from back east who was clearly, Sarah thought, going to last about 3 months in Colorado before returning to wherever he came from. Harvey helped Sarah load her bags. She did not have many because she had packed for survival rather than comfort, and she had used some of the supplies at the station and would need to replenish in Denver. He handed her the sharps which she had left propped by the door, and their hands were briefly adjacent in the exchange, not quite touching close. "Thank you," she said, "for the frostbite treatment, for the hospitality. Thank you for what you did with Cord Tilly's." She inclined her head. Pete Alcott was calling down from the box about schedule. The mining accountant inside the coach was already making impatient noises. "Denver is a reasonable city," Harvey said conversationally, as though they were continuing a different conversation. "For a territory, it has a decent library. The school you are going to is well regarded." "How do you know about the school?" "Clara Holt was a passenger through here in September. She talked about it." A pause. "She talked about the teacher she was hoping to hire. Said the woman was extraordinary." Sarah looked at him. He was looking at her with that direct gray gaze, completely level, not performing anything. She said that. She said, I found a woman who crossed 2 mountain ranges to get to a job. If that does not tell you everything you need to know about her, I cannot help you. The feeling in Sarah's chest was large and warm and slightly frightening. She managed, she thought, to keep most of it off her face. She had not met me yet when she said that, Sarah pointed out. She was speculating. Was she wrong? Pete Alcott shouted again. Sarah gathered the sharps more firmly and stepped to the coach door, which Harvey held open for her. She looked at him once more from the step. The coaching road between here and Denver, she said. Does it pass through again? Are there scheduled stops? Every week, both directions. And you are here every week. I am here every week. They looked at each other. There was the specific communication of two very intelligent people who have decided to be honest with each other, conducted entirely without words, and it contained more actual content than most lengthy conversations. Then I expect I will see you, she said, and got into the coach. Harvey stood in front of the station and watched the coach until it was out of sight around the canyon bend, and then he went back inside and stood in the middle of the room where her coffee cup was still on the table, and her calculation was still drawn on the paper she had left behind. He had kept it carefully, which he did not analyze, and he felt the particular quality of the station's silence in a way he had not felt it before, which was as absence rather than simply as quiet. Tom Birch came in from the horse barn and looked at his employer and wisely said nothing. Denver in the winter of 1877 was cold and muddy and vital, and growing so fast that it seemed to visibly change between Monday and Friday. It had a population of something over 15,000 people, and all the infrastructure that 15,000 people require, plus all the infrastructure they were currently fighting about: water rights, road planning, the question of whether the railroad spur from Cheyenne would survive the various political forces trying to reroute it. It had a newspaper, 3 hotels, more saloons than a respectable count suggested, and Clara Holt's School on Larimer Street, which occupied a building that had previously been a dry goods warehouse and had been converted with more determination than money into 2 classrooms and a small office. Clara Holt herself was 52, originally from Cincinnati, and had survived the specific kind of life that teaches women either bitterness or resilience, and had clearly come through it on the resilience side. She was short and entirely gray-haired, and had the kind of energy that small rooms cannot contain. She greeted Sarah at the door of the school with a handshake that meant business and immediately showed her the classrooms, the supply situation, the enrollment list, and the 3 ongoing arguments with the school board in a rapid sequence that left no doubt about who was in charge. 24 students, Clara said, spreading the enrollment sheets on the office desk. Ages 8 to 16, mixed backgrounds. Several of the older children have very good practical skills and very poor formal education. Several of the younger ones are the opposite. Your primary challenge will be differentiation. I am accustomed to complex problems, Sarah said. Clara looked at her steadily for a moment. Yes, she said, I can see that. She gathered the papers. How were the mountains? Educational. A pause. I heard there was an incident at the Dusty Creek relay station. Sarah looked at her. The Territorial Telegraph Network works quickly. Harvey McCrae filed a report with the stage company. Deputy Franklin filed a report with the sheriff. These things travel. Clara set down the papers and folded her hands on the desk with the air of someone who has decided to say something directly. Harvey McCrae is a very reliable man. Not everyone can say that. I found him so, Sarah said neutrally. He has been at that station 3 years. Before that, he did work that not many men could do, and he did it honestly, which is rarer. He is 30 years old and has not been to Denver in 6 months because the station is difficult to leave during the busy season, and because, this is my observation, not anything he has said, he is not entirely certain what he would do in Denver that would be worth leaving the station for. Sarah looked at Clara Holt with something approaching amusement. Are you telling me something in particular? I am giving you context, Clara said, about the territory, people who live and work here. The kind of character that this place produces when it produces good character. She picked up the enrollment sheets again. He ferried passengers on this route for 2 years before I was his passenger. He said to me when I came through in September that in 2 years of coaching passengers through this stretch, I was the bravest passenger he had ever had. Because I was 60 years old, she was not, but Sarah did not correct her, and I crossed the high country alone to look at a school building, and he respected that. There was a pause. "He is going to say the same thing about you," Clara added, "and he will mean it differently." Sarah did not respond immediately. She looked at the enrollment sheets, which were more interesting to examine at this particular moment than Clara Holt's very observant face. "The boy listed here as Daniel Marsh, age 14, she said. "What is his background?" Clara, who was far too intelligent to press a point past its useful moment, shifted seamlessly. "His father is a miner. Daniel has been keeping the camp accounts since he was 11. Extraordinary with numbers, terrible reader." "We can fix the reading," Sarah said. She threw herself into the school. It was, in the most literal sense, what she had come for, and she was very good at it. She was not a warm teacher in the sentimental way. She did not believe in false encouragement, which she considered a form of disrespect. But she was intensely respectful of her students' actual abilities, whatever those were, and she was very good at finding the angle of approach that made a given concept legible to a given mind. Daniel Marsh could do algebra in his head but had never seen it named or formalized, and the afternoon she showed him that the thing he had been doing intuitively was a formal branch of mathematics. The look on his face was one of the best things she had seen in a long time. She wrote to her sister. She described the school, the students, Denver, the mountains. She did not describe Harvey McCrae, which was a choice that her sister, who knew her very well, would have noticed if she had been paying attention to what was absent. The stage line came through Denver every week, both directions. Sarah knew the schedule. She was not at the stage office every time the northbound coach came through, because she had things to do and a life to live. But she was there on the 4th week, when the coach from Glenwood came in, and she was standing near the door when Harvey McCrae climbed down from the box. He had driven it himself. Pete Alcott had a broken arm, horse had stepped on it, and the run needed to be made, so Harvey had arranged for Tom Birch to cover the station and driven the route himself. She did not know this until later. What she knew first was that he came around the side of the coach and saw her and stopped for a full second, which was a significant thing for a man who moved with the kind of sure economy she had observed in him. "Miss Carver," he said. "Mr. McCrae." A pause. "What happened to Pete?" "Broken arm, horse." "I see." Another pause. "How long are you in Denver?" "Through tomorrow morning, company business." He was looking at her with the gray eyes, steady, and the particular focused quality that she had decided over the past 4 weeks was one of the things she found most compelling about him. He did not look at things vaguely. He looked at them specifically. "Clara Holt's school is 3 blocks from here," Sarah said. "I have student work to review this evening, but I could be done by 7. Is there a place in this city that serves a decent meal after 7? There is a place on Blake Street. The food is good, the company is variable." He almost smiled, not quite. "I will find you at 7, he said. She walked back to the school with the precise, measured steps of a woman who was not going to allow herself to hurry, which required more concentration than she would have liked to admit. The meal at Blake Street was 3 hours long. They talked about the bridge calculations they had started in the relay station, and then kept going, because the mathematics led naturally to a discussion of the proposed road expansion through the canyon, which led to the question of how the territory was going to develop its infrastructure given the complex land claims in the high country, which led to the Leadville silver boom and what it was going to do to the transportation network. They talked about education. He had strong opinions about what children needed to know that proved, when examined, to be closely aligned with her own. They talked about what the territory would look like in 20 years, and both of them had genuinely different pictures of it, and the argument this produced was one of the best arguments Sarah had had in years. He walked her back to the boarding house where she was staying. Denver's streets in January were cold and lit by gas lamps that cast orange pools of light on the packed snow, their breath clouded in the air between them. They walked at the same pace, which was faster than most people walked, and this small physical compatibility felt to Sarah like more evidence. At the boarding house door he stopped. She stopped. They stood looking at each other in the gas lamp light. "I have been thinking about what you said," he said, "that your father was the smartest person you knew until recently. Have you? I want you to know that I do not take that lightly." She looked at him, at the serious, deliberate face, the jaw, the careful gray eyes, and felt the thing in her chest that she had been noting and filing and not yet naming. She was ready to name it now, or at least to begin the naming process. "I said it because it was true," she said. "Everything I say to you is because it is true." He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than a conversational moment. Then he said, "I will be back through Denver in 3 weeks, southbound from Cheyenne, if you are not busy." "I will not be busy," she said. He nodded. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was simply courtesy, nothing more, and yet was somehow exactly right, and turned and walked back toward the stage office. And Sarah watched him go, and then went inside and sat on her bed and looked at the ceiling for a while and felt entirely and happily complicated. 3 weeks became a pattern. Then 6 weeks, then 8. Harvey reorganized his schedule, trading routes with other drivers when he could, taking the Denver run whenever it was available. And Sarah found that her awareness of the weekly stage schedule had become involuntary and constant, the way you cannot help noticing the weather when you have work that depends on it. Spring came to Denver in the slow way it comes to high country, reluctantly and in stages, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first and then grudgingly from the rest. The mud season was considerable and unromantic, but the smell of the earth coming back to life was something that Sarah, 4 months into Colorado, found unexpectedly moving. She had not expected to love this place. She had expected to find it interesting and challenging and professionally satisfying. The love had been a surprise. Harvey drove the southbound coach in April on a clear afternoon when the air smelled like pine resin, and the first actual warmth of the season had produced in the Denver streets a visible collective exhale. Sarah met him at the stage office with her journal and with Daniel Marsh, who was 14 and deeply curious about everything, and whom she had asked along for the specific purpose of meeting the man who operated the mountain relay station, because she was teaching Daniel about logistics, and the stage line was an extraordinary lesson in practical logistics. Harvey shook the boy's hand with complete seriousness, asked him 3 questions about the accounting methods he had developed, and spent 20 minutes explaining the station operation while Daniel's eyes got wider and wider. When they finally sent Daniel back to the school, he had forgotten to be nervous around this large, direct man, because Harvey asked such genuinely interesting questions that nervousness had simply not had room to take hold. Harvey looked at Sarah with an expression that she had come to recognize as the one that meant he was about to say something real. "You brought him because you are teaching him something specific," he said. "I brought him because he needs to see that the mathematics he is learning has immediate practical application. Abstract knowledge without visible use tends not to stick with students who came to education late." Harvey considered this. "That is a very precise understanding of how people learn. I have been paying attention to how people learn for the last 3 months." She looked at him sideways. "I have also been paying attention to how you learn incidentally. And you learn best by doing. You need to hold the idea in your hands before it becomes fully real to you. This is not a weakness. Most practical people are the same. But it means that if I want you to understand something, I should show you the application before the theory." Harvey stopped walking. They were on the street outside the stage office in the thin April sunlight, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, which was the expression of someone who has been seen accurately and completely and is not sure yet how to respond to that. "You have been analyzing me," he said. "I analyze everything," she said. "It is how I am constituted." "Does it bother people?" "Frequently." She met his eyes. "Does it bother you?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough for her to feel the question in it. "No," he said. "It does not." He was in Denver for 2 days. The first evening they had dinner again at the Blake Street place, and the second afternoon she showed him the school, the classrooms, the students, Daniel's account books, the survey maps she had pinned to the wall as teaching materials. He moved through the space with that careful attention she associated with him, asking the right questions, noticing the things that mattered, and she watched him look at the evidence of what she had built in this warehouse-turned classroom and feel something she could only describe as pride, not in herself, but in the specific reality of the place, the actual thing that was happening here. "It is good work," he said, standing in the doorway of the main classroom. "Yes," she said, "it is." He looked at her. "Are you happy here?" The question was direct, and it deserved a direct answer. "I am satisfied," she said carefully. "Happy is a larger word. I think it requires more components." "What components?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "That is a question I am not going to answer while standing in a classroom doorway." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." That was April. In May, on a southbound run, he brought her something. He set it on the table at Blake Street with a slightly self-conscious air that she found entirely endearing, and it was a bound journal, blank, high quality, with good thick paper, and on the inside cover he had written in his clean, careful handwriting, "For the elevation calculation and everything else worth writing down." She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at him. "Thank you," she said, which was not remotely sufficient but was what she had at that moment. "I found a journal from a surveying outfit out of St. Louis," he said. "They publish terrain accounts and technical work. I wrote to them. They said they would consider a submission from a qualified writer on ballistics mathematics if the work was original." She set down the journal. Something large and complicated moved through her. "You wrote to them." "I included a summary of the calculation. I did not use your name. I said the work was developed by a frontier researcher. They did not ask for clarification." She looked at the table's surface for a moment. She was composing herself, which was not something she generally needed to do. "Harvey, you said 3 journals had turned you down. I thought perhaps the framing was the problem rather than the work." "The work is not the problem," she agreed. "No, it never is." She picked up the journal again and ran her thumb along the edge of the pages. "If they publish it, I want my name on it." "Then we will figure out how to make that happen," he said, completely simply, as though it were the obvious next step, which it was. In June, he came to Denver and stayed 4 days, which was longer than any previous visit. The stage company had asked him to consult with the Denver office about the southern route expansion, and he had done this and then spent his remaining time with Sarah. And the dynamic of 4 consecutive days was different from the dynamic of 1 or 2. It had more room in it, more of the texture of actual dailiness, and they both felt this. On the 3rd evening, they walked along Cherry Creek, which ran through the city and was running high with the spring snowmelt, brown and fast and cold. The light was long and golden, the way it gets in June at altitude, and the city noises were softened by distance and water, and they had been talking about a great many things and had arrived at a comfortable silence when Harvey stopped walking and looked at the creek for a moment and said, with the directness that was simply how he communicated, "I need to say something to you." Sarah waited. "I have been thinking about this since January," he said. "Since the relay station. I have been thinking about it with the same amount of rigor that I apply to things I need to understand correctly, because I do not want to be wrong about it." She turned slightly toward him. The light caught the side of his face. "I am in love with you," he said. "I want to be honest about that because I think you deserve honesty above anything else, and I think you have known this for some time but have been waiting for me to say it properly. and I did not want to say it until I was certain it was the right word and not a lesser one. The creek ran past them. A pair of ducks went by with the determined urgency of creatures that had somewhere specific to be. "It is the right word," Sarah said. "And yes, I have known." She looked at the creek and then back at him. "I have been in love with you since you asked me what the most dangerous part of the crossing was, not because it was romantic, because it was the first question anyone had ever asked that was about the experience rather than the fact of it." He looked at her, and she could see the full weight of it in his face, the relief of finally saying a true thing and the joy of having it met. "What do you want?" he asked. "From your life. I am asking because whatever I say next depends on what you want." She considered this. "I want the school," she said. "I want to keep doing this work. I want to publish the calculation and then more work after that. I want to be in Colorado." A pause. "I want you in my life in whatever form makes sense given all of that." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The stage company wants me in Denver. They offered me the operations manager position 3 months ago and I have not answered them yet because I was not sure Denver was." He stopped, restarted. "The station is a good posting. I am good at it. But it is not where I want to be for the next 30 years. She looked at him. "Denver is where I want to be," he said. The specific way he said it made it completely clear that Denver was not the point. She stepped closer to him. She was not a physically impulsive person, but she put her hand in his, which was large and warm and solid, and he closed his fingers around hers with a carefulness that suggested he understood the weight of what she had given him. They stood by the creek in the June light and did not need to say anything else for a while. Harvey accepted the operations manager position in July. He moved to Denver at the beginning of August with very little. He had always lived with very little, the particular lightness of a man who has learned that what matters is not possessions but capacity. He found a room in a boarding house 2 streets from the school, which was practical, and began the new position with the thorough, unglamorous competence that had characterized everything he did. They walked together in the evenings. They had dinner at Blake Street so frequently that the woman who ran the kitchen had learned what they both preferred without being asked. They argued about infrastructure and education and the best methods for learning long division and whether the city was growing too fast for its water supply. They were on opposite sides of this last one, which was an excellent argument that lasted 3 weeks and ultimately concluded with Sarah being right, though Harvey's concession was graceful and thorough. He proposed to her in September, in the school classroom after the students had gone home, which was not a conventional setting but which was, she told him afterward, the exact right setting, because the school was where she had built the most important thing in her life in Colorado, and having him there made it complete. He had written out in the careful handwriting she knew a list of what he was proposing, which included marriage, obviously, but also specifically her continued work at the school, full stop, her name on the ballistics paper when it was published, his genuine interest in whatever she decided to do next and next and next after that. And at the bottom of the list, in slightly larger writing, the simple statement that he had never met anyone who made him want to be better at understanding things, and that he intended to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of her assessment of him as the smartest person she had encountered. She read the list twice. She looked at him. She said yes, with the complete certainty of a woman who has calculated the probability and found it to be essentially 100%. They married in October of 1877 in Denver, in a small ceremony at the church on Welton Street. Clara Holt stood with Sarah. Tom Birch, who had come down from the relay station for the occasion, stood with Harvey. There were perhaps 30 guests, colleagues from the stage company, students' families, several of the Denver people who had come to know them both in the months since Harvey had moved to the city. The minister was a practical man who kept the ceremony reasonably brief. The weather was clear, and the aspens in the mountains east of the city had turned gold, which Sarah noted was excellent visibility from the church windows. Harvey said his vows with the same quality he brought to everything, looking directly at her, meaning every word, not performing any of it. She said hers back with the precision of a woman who has chosen her words carefully because she means them to be exact. When it was done, he kissed her with a thoroughness that suggested he had been thinking about it for some time, and the 30 guests present made an appropriate amount of noise about it. The ballistics paper was published in the Surveying Journal in November of 1877. Under the name S.E. Carver, she had kept her professional name, and Harvey had had no objection to this, because he had married her understanding exactly who she was and had no interest in changing any of it. The journal editor had, after some correspondence, agreed to publish with the full name. It generated more response than the journal had expected. 3 letters from military ordnance officers, one from a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and one from a gunsmiths' association in St. Louis, and the editor wrote to ask if she had more work. She did. The winter of 1877 into 1878 was cold and domestic and contained specific joys that Sarah had not expected, because she had not permitted herself to expect them. She and Harvey had moved into a small house on Arapahoe Street, 3 rooms, a good solid stove, a garden space in the back that would be productive in the summer if she kept after it, which she intended to. She was discovering that she liked having a home. Not in any passive way, she was constitutionally incapable of passivity, but in the active building sense. The gradual accumulation of things that were theirs, the particular pleasure of a space that was organized according to their combined understanding of what a space should contain. Harvey came home from the stage company offices every evening at 6, and they had dinner and talked about their days with the same kind of directness they had brought to the relay station table in January. He was good at the operations work. He had a gift for seeing the inefficiencies in a system and addressing them without drama, and the company had already noticed this in ways that were reflected in his compensation. He was also, she observed, quietly very proud of her work, in the way of a man who does not make loud performances of his opinions, but holds them with great consistency. In March of 1878, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She made this determination herself, based on a systematic application of the medical knowledge she had inherited from her father, approximately 3 weeks before she was entirely certain, and then spent those 3 weeks acquiring as much current medical literature as Denver afforded before telling Harvey. She wanted accurate information before the conversation, because she intended the conversation to be honest. She told him on a Sunday evening, with the precision she brought to all significant communications. She told him what she had observed, what she had concluded, her estimated timeline, and the specific adjustments she intended to make to her working situation, which were minimal and carefully considered. Harvey sat for a moment after she finished. Then he said, with an unsteadiness in his voice that she had not heard before and which she found unexpectedly very moving, "Are you well? Are you frightened?" "I am well," she said. "And I am not frightened exactly. I am in new territory." He reached across the table and took her hand. "We are both in new territory," he said. "We will figure it out the same way we figure out everything. By calculating the probabilities and proceeding accordingly. By paying attention and being honest about what we do not know." She held his hand. "Yes," she said. "That." The pregnancy was, by most measures, uncomplicated. She continued teaching through the spring, adapting as necessary with the matter-of-fact pragmatism that characterized all her physical undertakings. Clara Holt, when told, received the news with satisfaction, and immediately began planning the practical logistics of a temporary replacement teacher for the fall term. Sarah spent the summer months continuing her correspondence with the Surveying Journal, writing 2 more technical papers, one on topographical mapping methods at high altitude, one on the mathematics of snowpack prediction, and organizing her comprehensive notes on frontier education into what was beginning to look like a book. Harvey watched her work with the particular quality of attention that she had come to understand was his version of devotion, not performative, not sentimental, simply the consistent direction of his full regard toward her. He also, without being asked, read the topographical mapping paper and identified 2 places where her explanation could be clearer for a less mathematically sophisticated reader, and his suggested revisions were correct, which she told him directly and without caveat. Their son was born in November of 1878, at home, with a competent midwife and the local physician who had been Harvey's first call when it became clear the time had come. Harvey was present. This was not universal practice, but it was what Sarah had specified, and he had agreed to without question. And he held her hand through the parts that required it with a steady, quiet strength that she drew on and was grateful for. They named him Edmund after her father, with the middle name Thomas for Harvey's father, who had also died farming accident years before and had not lived to see his son become the man he was. Edmund Thomas McCrae was born at 2 in the afternoon on the 14th of November and was healthy and loud about it, and had a shock of dark hair that made Harvey laugh with a completeness that Sarah had never heard from him before, and which she immediately knew was the most important sound she had ever heard. She looked at the child and then at Harvey looking at the child, and she felt the specific shape of the life she had built, the calculation that had brought her west, the mountain ranges crossed, the gun in a relay station, the coffee in the dark, the elevation formula drawn in snow, the journal, the survey maps, the school, the students, the creek in the June light, the paper published with her name on it, this man, this house, this room, and it was, she thought, with the precision she brought to all honest assessments, exactly what she had wanted, though she could not have named it in advance. The best calculations, she knew, were the ones that produced results better than you had predicted. Edmund was an energetic child from the beginning, with his mother's focused curiosity and his father's steady temperament, a combination that produced a boy who sat quietly for hours figuring out how things worked, and then demanded that you explain in detail why they worked that way. Harvey began teaching him the basic mechanical principles of the stagecoach when he was 3, in the patient, show-don't-tell method that Sarah had identified as Harvey's natural teaching mode. Sarah started him on numbers before he could fully read, because the numbers came easier to him, and she wanted him to have the confidence of early mastery in something before the harder work of letters. The ballistics calculation paper had been reprinted twice by 1880, once by the Military Ordnance Office, and once in a compilation published by a Chicago scientific society. The cartographer's paper had been cited in a territorial survey report. The education book was taking shape slower than she would have liked, because she was teaching full-time and had a small child, but it was growing. Clara Holt read each chapter as it was completed and told Sarah with characteristic directness what was good, what needed work, and what was absolutely essential. It was a useful editorial arrangement. The Denver of 1880 was a different city from the Denver Sarah had arrived in 3 years earlier. The railroad had come. The Denver and Rio Grande had arrived in 1870, and the connections had expanded steadily since, and the city had grown around the access it provided with the particular hunger of a place that knows it is positioned at a crossroads. The population had exceeded 30,000. There were new schools, 2 hospitals, a telegraph office that was always busy, and the beginning of serious civic architecture in stone and brick that suggested the city understood it was going to last. Harvey had moved up to district manager at the stage company, overseeing the network of routes across the southern Colorado territory. It was not glamorous work from the outside, but from the inside it required exactly the kind of systems thinking he was good at, and the salary was such that they had been able to expand the house on Arapahoe Street. An addition that doubled the size and included a proper study for Sarah with good north-facing light, which Harvey had insisted on when they were planning it. Because he had spent 3 months watching her write at a table in the kitchen, and had understood that she needed a real space for the work. She stood in the finished study on the first day after the builders left and ran her hand along the desk he had built for her himself, solid walnut, sized exactly right, with a shallow drawer for her mathematical instruments and a deeper one for paper. She looked at the north-facing window and the light coming through it. "It is perfect," she said. He was leaning in the doorway with Edmund on his hip. The boy was 2, still in the age of being carried when convenient, though he was increasingly opinionated about being set down. "You said you wanted north light." "I did." She turned to look at him. "You built the desk." "I measured 3 times." "I can tell." She crossed the room and kissed him, which she did with the same directness she brought to everything. And Edmund, between them, made a strong objection to being caught between 2 adults engaged in this activity and said so loudly. She laughed. Harvey laughed. Edmund, realizing the laughter was at his expense, considered this for a moment, and then decided to find it acceptable and laughed too, which was one of those moments of small, complete happiness that does not announce itself in advance. In the summer of 1881, Daniel Marsh, who was now 17 and had been Sarah's student for 4 years and was preparing for the new territorial college, came to the house on Arapahoe Street with a problem. Not an academic problem. An actual problem. His father's mine claims were being challenged by a larger company on the basis of a survey discrepancy, and the family was at risk of losing everything, and the survey mathematics in the challenge document were wrong. Daniel had recognized that they were wrong. He had come to Sarah because she had taught him to recognize wrong mathematics. Sarah and Harvey spent 3 evenings reviewing the survey documents. Sarah identified 4 specific errors in the challenger's calculations, errors that were either accidental or deliberately introduced. She said, with a precision about the uncertainty that Harvey noted and appreciated. She wrote up the corrections in the form of a formal mathematical rebuttal, with full documentation of each error and the correct values. Harvey accompanied Daniel's father to the attorney because he knew the attorney and because having a district manager of the stage company sitting in the meeting changed its character in useful ways. The mine claim was upheld. The errors were, subsequent investigation suggested, not accidental. The company challenging the Marsh claim was found to have employed the same survey correction method on 3 other claims in the territory, all of which were subsequently reviewed. It was not a glamorous victory. It was not widely reported. But Daniel Marsh went to the territorial college in the fall with his family's land intact, and a scholarship from a Denver civic fund that the school's board, of which Clara Holt was a member, had nominated him for, and he went knowing that the mathematics his teacher had given him had saved something real. The education book was published in 1882 by a Denver printer who had recently expanded to academic titles and who had been introduced to Sarah by Clara Holt. It was called Practical Learning for Frontier Children, Methods and Mathematics for the New Territory, and Sarah Carver McCrae was the name on the cover. She had kept the professional name for her scientific papers and the full name for the book, and Harvey had pointed out that this was practical, because people knew the Carver name from the journals, and she had agreed that this was correct. The book was reviewed in 4 papers, including the Denver Tribune, and the review in the Tribune included the line, "Miss Carver McCrae appears to have arrived in Colorado already understanding what it has taken the rest of us years to learn, that this territory demands a different kind of education, and she has written the method for delivering it." She read the review at the breakfast table and set it down and felt, with quiet completeness, that something she had worked for had been met. Harvey read the review across from her. He looked at her. "Your father would have read this," he said. "Yes." A pause. "He would have had opinions about the methodology section. Good opinions." She considered. "Some. The argument in Chapter 4 is not as tight as it could be. He would have seen that." She picked up her coffee cup. "He would have liked you very much, I think." Harvey looked at his coffee. "That matters to me," he said, simply, without performance. "I know," she said. "That is one of the reasons it is true." Their second child was born in the spring of 1883. Another boy, which Harvey had somewhat expected and Sarah had not, because she had been more prepared for the other possibility. They named him William, for no more complicated reason than that it was a good solid name, and neither of them had a prior claim on it. William was quieter than Edmund from the beginning, more observational, with a tendency to sit and watch things before engaging with them that Sarah recognized immediately as Harvey's epistemological method in small human form. Edmund, at 4, received his brother with the mixed feelings of a firstborn who is not entirely certain the arrangement is equitable, but came around quickly when he discovered that William was interested in everything Edmund did and would watch him with complete attention for considerable periods, which Edmund found gratifying. Life on Arapahoe Street in 1883 was full. Harvey managed the stage network, which was increasingly complicated by the railroad expansion but not yet superseded by it. There were stretches of territory the trains did not reach that still needed coaches, and the transition was a logistical problem that Harvey was genuinely interested in solving well rather than messily. Sarah taught 4 days a week at Clara Holt's school, now expanded to 4 classrooms, and spent the 5th day writing. The third paper, on snowpack mathematics, had been picked up by a national journal out of Boston, and the correspondence she was now maintaining with scientists and mathematicians in the eastern cities was a source of ongoing intellectual pleasure that she managed alongside everything else with the systematic efficiency that was simply how she operated. They had dinner together every evening. They argued about things that mattered and some things that did not, and they were honest with each other about both, and they touched each other with the ease of people who have moved past self-consciousness into something more durable. Harvey had learned over 6 years the precise signs of when Sarah needed quiet and when she needed engagement, and she had learned the same for him, and they managed this without discussion, simply as the ongoing practice of paying attention to each other. Clara Holt retired from the school's directorship in 1884, at 63, having built it from a warehouse with 24 students to a proper institution with 112. She did not stop having opinions about it. Sarah was asked by the school board to take the director position, and she accepted, with the direct acknowledgement that she would run it the way she thought it should be run, and the board could either support her or find someone else, which was an opening statement that the board found initially alarming, and then, over time, appreciated, because it meant they always knew exactly where they stood. The school thrived. The methods in the book were now being used by 3 other frontier schools in the territory. Sarah had received correspondence from a teacher in New Mexico Territory and one in Utah Territory, both of whom had found the book and written to say that the differentiation methods had changed how they worked with their students. These letters went into a folder she kept in the study, and she read them occasionally when the administrative work of running a school became heavy, and she needed to remember what it was for. In the winter of 1885, Harvey came home from the stage company office and told her that the company had offered him the opportunity to submit a proposal for the integrated road and rail network in the Southern Territory, a collaboration between the stage company and the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad to create a coordinated transportation system that would serve the parts of Colorado that the rail had not yet reached. It was a significant thing, and it would require months of planning and a considerable amount of political navigation, and he was describing it to her at dinner with the particular focused energy that she associated with him having found a problem worth solving. She listened to the full description. She asked 4 questions. Then she said, "You should do it, and you should take it seriously because if you build it correctly it will still be running in 50 years. He looked at her. "You think it will work? The logistical framework you described is sound. The political element is the uncertain part, and that is a people problem rather than a systems problem, which means it depends on the quality of the people involved. You are a very high-quality person." She picked up her fork. "I am biased, but I am also accurate." He laughed the genuine, unguarded laugh that she had first heard in the relay station when she had said she was fond of her toes, and which had not got any less important to her in the years since. "I will submit the proposal," he said. "Good." She ate a bite of her dinner. "I want to review it before you submit it." "I assumed you would." She met his eyes. "You know me very well." "I have been paying attention for 9 years," he said. "I intend to keep paying attention." The proposal was submitted in February of 1886 and accepted in April. Harvey spent the next 2 years building the integrated network, working with surveyors and railroad men and stage company managers and the various political entities of the territory, which had become the state of Colorado in 1876 and had the particular set of institutional complexities that statehood brings. Sarah read every version of the proposal documents and contributed, without formal credit but also without resentment, the topographical analysis that underpinned the route selection. Harvey cited the analysis in the proposal documentation as coming from the work of S.E. Carver McCrae of the Denver Frontier School, because it was the truth and because truth mattered. Daniel Marsh graduated from the State Agricultural and Mechanical College in 1886 and came back to Denver with a degree in engineering, which he told Sarah at the graduation reception was entirely her doing, by which he meant she had shown him that the thing his mind did naturally was the thing that engineering was built on. He was 22 and had the look of a young man who had arrived at his life. She was 35 and had the look of a woman who had built hers, piece by calculated piece, from the ground up, and was nowhere near finished. Edmund was 7 in 1885, William was 2, and that spring there was a third child, a girl, finally, with Harvey's gray eyes and Sarah's particular quality of stillness before action, which meant she appeared to be doing nothing until she suddenly did something extremely precise. They named her Margaret after Sarah's mother. 3 children, a school, 2 published books. The second had come out in 1885, an expanded methodology with new chapters on advanced mathematics for frontier students, a network of papers in national journals, and a man who came home every evening at 6 and built things with his hands on the weekends, and read whatever she recommended and argued when he disagreed, and kissed her with consistent thoroughness, and held her in the particular way she had learned to depend on in the years since the relay station. The integrated road and rail network launched in 1888. Harvey stood at the ceremony in Denver, a modest affair, as such things went, more practical than celebratory, which was appropriate, and looked at the map on the wall behind the speaker, the network of routes across southern Colorado that he had spent 2 years designing, and his expression was the one she knew best from him. The quiet, internal satisfaction of a person who has done a thing well. She was standing beside him. Edmund was between them, 8 years old and extremely interested in the map, because he had grown up hearing about the routes and the logistics and the problems that had been solved, and he had his father's gift for systems, and had been asking sharp questions about the network for 2 years. William, 5, was on Harvey's other side, holding his father's hand and watching the proceedings with his characteristic observational patience. Margaret, 3, was in Sarah's arms and was less interested in the map than in a button on Sarah's collar, which she was examining with forensic intensity. "It is good work," Sarah said quietly to Harvey, echoing what he had said to her in the school classroom 11 years earlier. He looked at her, and the thing that passed between them was not just recognition of the echo, it was the full weight of the years, the specific catalog of what they had done together and what they had been to each other. There was no darkness in it. There had been difficulty, and there had been hard moments and arguments and the specific frictions of 2 very strong-willed, highly intelligent people sharing a life, but there was no darkness. They had been honest with each other from the beginning, and that honesty had been the foundation that everything else was built on. "Very good work," he said. He was talking about the network. He was talking about everything. The years after 1888 had their own texture. The children grew with the speed that children grow when you are paying close attention, too fast to track day by day, but entirely legible in retrospect. Edmund at 12 was working through algebra with his mother's old textbooks and building things in the shed with his father on Saturdays. William at 9 discovered books the way some people discover water, as though they had always been thirsty and had not known what for, and read with a thoroughness that rivaled his mother's, which was saying something. Margaret at 6 was, it became clear, going to be her parents combined in the most concentrated possible form. Her mother's mathematical precision and her father's practical ability to build things, applied to the world with a cheerful relentlessness that made everyone who encountered her simultaneously exhausted and delighted. Sarah's work continued to expand. The third book came out in 1890, a broader work on frontier education policy, dedicated to Clara Holt, who read it in manuscript from the comfortable house where she had retired and sent back 7 pages of notes that were all correct. The Boston Journal published 2 more papers. The Ordnance Office wrote twice more about the ballistics calculation, asking for permission to include it in training materials, which she granted with the condition that S.E. Carver McCrae was named as the originator, which they agreed to after some correspondence. Harvey turned 40 in 1887, and Sarah threw him a dinner at the house on Arapahoe Street, now substantially expanded from its original 3 rooms, grown around the life they had added to it, with a collection of people that surprised him by being such a precise map of everything that mattered. Tom Birch, who had eventually left the relay station and was now working for the railroad and had married a woman from Pueblo. Daniel Marsh, who was building bridges, actual suspension bridges, including one over the Arkansas River that was by any measure an elegant piece of engineering. Clara Holt, several colleagues from the stage company, several teachers from the school, and a handful of Denver people who had been part of their lives over the years. He stood in the middle of his own dinner party and looked at his wife across the room, where she was deep in a conversation with Daniel about the Arkansas River Bridge, and he felt something that he had felt, in varying forms, since a January night in a relay station when she had walked in with a Sharps rifle and shown him what bravery actually looked like. He had told Pete Alcott, when Pete had finally come back from the broken arm and returned to the southbound route, that in all the years he had been ferrying passengers on this stretch of mountain road. The woman who had walked into the relay station from a crossing of 2 mountain ranges in January was the bravest passenger he had ever seen. Pete had said, very reasonably, that she had not actually been a passenger at that point since she had arrived on foot, and Harvey had said that the technicality was irrelevant, which Pete had accepted, because the story had already gotten around the company, and the general consensus was that Harvey was correct. He had told a lot of people over the years that version of the story. He had told it accurately and with the specific admiration that it deserved, because it was true and because she deserved to be described truthfully. What he had not always told people, because some things are not for general distribution, was what the story had done to him, how it had reorganized him, how the calculation drawn in snow behind a relay station in the Rocky Mountains in January of 1877 had been the beginning of the most important understanding of his life, which was not actually about ballistics at all. He crossed the room. She looked up from her conversation with Daniel when she felt him approach, the way she always knew when he was nearby. She would have said, if pressed, that it was simply a well-developed environmental awareness, but Harvey had a different theory that he had never pressed, because pressing was not his method. "Enjoying your party?" she asked. "You organized this," he said. "I organized it efficiently. Tom Birch did the invitations." "Tom Birch cannot spell half these names." He managed. She turned slightly toward him, and Daniel, with the good sense of a man who had learned from both of them, The wisdom of recognizing when his presence was no longer the point, excused himself. "Are you happy?" she asked. The same question he had asked her by Cherry Creek 13 years ago. "Yes," he said, "completely." "Are you?" She looked at him for a moment. At the jaw and the gray eyes and the careful, steady quality of him, the man who had built her a desk and written to a journal on her behalf and held her hand through every new territory they had entered together and never once asked her to be smaller than she was. The man who had been shocked into respect and had stayed there, had made respect the ground of everything between them. "I have been happy since January of 1877, she said, "with adjustments for complexity." He smiled. It was the smile she had waited so long to earn, the full one, the unguarded one. "Complexity is your natural environment," he said. "It is." She took his hand. "Fortunately, you thrive in challenging terrain." He looked at their joined hands. Then he looked at the room, the friends, the children in the back of the house with the neighbor's daughter who was watching them, the house itself with its additions and its study with the north-facing light, the party that was the visible shape of the life they had built, and then he looked at her. "I will take that as a compliment," he said. "It was the highest one I have," she said. By 1895, the house on Arapahoe Street had grown one more time, another addition, when Margaret outgrew her shared room with enough conviction that the walls of the original structure began to feel the pressure. Edmund was 15 and had decided, with the specific certainty of a boy who has been paying attention his whole life, that he intended to be a civil engineer, which Daniel Marsh had said was the most logical possible outcome for a boy raised by those two particular people. William was 12 and had decided he wanted to write, not fiction but something like the work his mother did, clear, precise, useful. And Sarah was encouraging this without pressure, because she understood that clarity of expression was a skill and not merely a talent, and it could be taught. Margaret was 9 and had dismantled and successfully reassembled the kitchen clock, the mechanism on the back gate, and one of Harvey's surveying instruments, which she had been explicitly told not to touch, but had apparently found the instruction insufficiently compelling. Sarah was 44 and was in the process of finishing her 4th book, which was the most ambitious, a comprehensive argument for public investment in frontier education, drawing on 20 years of teaching experience and the data she had been systematically collecting since 1877. Harvey was 48 and running the largest private transportation network in the state, a combination of the remaining stage routes and the rail coordination work that had evolved from the 1888 network, and was serving on the State Transportation Commission, which was very dry work, but which he did with the same thoroughness he brought to everything. They were, by any honest measure, people who had built something extraordinary, not just the professional accomplishments, not just the books and the papers and the network and the school, but the actual life of it, the daily practice of two people choosing each other consistently, choosing honesty and attention and respect as the operating principles, and finding that this produced, over the years, not just a partnership but a genuine home. On a Sunday afternoon in October of 1895, with the mountains east of Denver showing snow on their caps and the aspens in the foothills burning gold in the clear autumn light, Sarah sat in the study with the north-facing light and worked on the final chapter of the 4th book. Harvey was in the garden she had always meant to keep, which had over the years become excellent, doing the fall preparation with Edmund's help, and she could hear them talking outside the window, Harvey explaining something about soil composition and Edmund asking the right questions, and she could hear the difference in their voices now, the boy's voice settling toward the man's, and she thought about Edmund at birth and Edmund now and the distance between those 2 points, which was 15 years of her close attention and Harvey's steady presence and the accumulated weight of everything they had taught him. She looked at the page she was writing. The last chapter was about what frontier education actually required, at its core, and she had been circling the real answer for weeks, because the real answer was not a curriculum or a method or a budget. The real answer was the thing she had learned in a relay station in January of 1877 from a man who had asked her what the most dangerous part was. The real answer was attention, the willingness to ask the question that took the experience seriously. The refusal to dismiss the person who had lived it, the insistence on accuracy over comfort. She wrote the chapter. She wrote it in the clear, direct language she had used in all her books, without sentiment, with the specific kind of rigor that she had learned was the highest form of respect, not simplifying for the reader, but trusting the reader to meet her at the real complexity of the thing. When it was done, she set down her pen and looked out the north-facing window, which showed her the side yard and the distant edge of the mountains. Harvey came in from the garden an hour later, bringing the smell of cold air and turned earth with him, and found her in the study with the completed manuscript stacked on the desk and a cup of tea that had gone cold beside it. He looked at the manuscript. Done. Done, she looked up at him. All of it. I want you to read it before I send it to the publisher. You want my actual opinion. I always want your actual opinion, you know that. He sat down in the chair across the desk, the chair he had brought from the front room specifically for this purpose, for the evenings he spent in the study with her while she worked, reading or keeping her company or arguing about whatever was on both their minds. He picked up the top pages. She watched him read. She made fresh tea. She sat across from him in the study with the north-facing light and listened to the house around her. Margaret somewhere upstairs engaged in something involving what sounded like a significant mechanical project. William in his room with his books. Edmund outside finishing the garden. The stove in the kitchen doing its steady work. Harvey across the desk, reading her words with the same focused attention he had given to her elevation calculation in the snow 20 years ago. The mountains were golden and cold outside the window. The story of Sarah Carver was not a story about a woman who survived the wilderness, though she had. It was not a story about a woman who published papers in a time that told her she could not, though she had done that too. It was not even entirely a story about a woman who had crossed 2 mountain ranges alone and walked into a relay station and saved a man's life and shown him what she knew and been shown in return, something that she had not known she was missing. It was a story about 2 people who had been honest with each other from the beginning, who had built on that honesty everything that followed, who had never stopped paying attention to each other or to the work that mattered to them, and who had found over the years that the combination of those 2 things, each other and the work, was not a compromise but a multiplication. Harvey looked up from the manuscript. The final chapter, he said. Yes, the part about attention, about asking the question that takes the experience seriously. He set the pages down carefully. You are right, that is the whole thing, isn't it? I believe so, she said. He looked at her across the desk, across the 20 years of their life together, across the specific accumulated weight of every conversation and argument and evening and morning, and child and paper and book and dinner at Blake Street, and walk along Cherry Creek, and night in the relay station with the fire fed carefully through the dark. I am glad I asked, he said. She looked back at him with the full clarity of a woman who knows exactly what she has and what it cost and what it is worth. So am I, she said. It was the right question. Outside the window, the mountains held their snow. In the garden, Edmund finished his work and came inside, bringing the October cold with him and the particular energy of a 15-year-old who has been moving his body all afternoon and is now very interested in dinner. Upstairs, Margaret's mechanical project reached some kind of conclusion, audible by the satisfying click of something fitting together correctly. William came out of his room with a book under his arm and asked if there was tea. The house on Arapahoe Street was full and warm and exactly what it was supposed to be. Harvey McCrae reached across the desk and took his wife's hand. She held it. The calculation had come out correctly, better than predicted, in fact, which was the best kind of correct there was.